Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Brian Campbell. I am the Director for the Bureau of Curriculum Assessment and Instruction at the Department of Education. And again, I thank you for joining us in this session. This is the second session we are presenting to look at some of the local assessment data and some of the analytics that the department is working to provide folks for their local assessment data. And again, even the more important, I think, step in the process then is to look at these analytics and make some really strong ties to some instructional planning and instructional decisions that we're all going to be faced with as school leaders as we move forward. This is part of our accelerated learning support system. If you're not familiar, the accelerated system grew out of the roadmap for school leaders. If folks remember the roadmap last year, that was established by the department as sort of a resource hub and best practices hub and support system as we navigated some of the challenges through the pandemic. And that sort of spawned the idea of the accelerated system of supports that has grown out of that. And that really is the focus this year for the department and for our U training partners and our Patan training partners as we shift from health-related concerns that we had to emphasize so much in the past few months to some educational planning concerns that we know you folks have as we address some of the opportunities for the unfinished teaching and learning and some of the challenges that have been presented as a result of this pandemic. You know, from a curriculum and assessment standpoint, I think the one thing that we want to be most cognizant of at the department and really help arm you to kind of deal with, you know, is the idea that not all kids in PA, not all of our learners are affected the same way by what's happened to us over the last 18, 19 months. And not only between systems, we know that certainly between school systems, there's some differences, but even within your own system, we know that each student did not have an identical experience and is not going to have an identical reaction to that experience. So our goal in this accelerated roadmap series is really to help you have as many tools in your toolbox as you can to help catch these kids up and to really look at this pandemic not being a long-term setback on your planning of quality instruction for your students. So if you haven't checked that website out, please do. This presentation, along with all of the presentations that have been associated with the roadmap, will be posted there, as will the PowerPoint and some of the resource materials that we discuss. And of course, through the roadmap, you can also reach out to myself and some of the PDE folks here for any assistance you need, technical assistance along the way. So please do check out the roadmap, and we hope you find today helpful. With me today is Kristen Leewald from IU13, who I'm sure you all know leads a lot of the school improvement work and PVAAS work throughout the state. Kristen's huge asset for us and help to all the districts in a lot of ways. If you haven't dealt with Kristen, you will, and she's fantastic. And we're both here to support our presenter. And our presenter today is Deneen Deaton. And Deneen is the manager of SAS-EVAS training team. SAS-EVAS is our vendor for our PVAAS services and our partner in this local assessment project. Deneen has been a school administrator, a district administrator in several different school systems, and she's worked at SAS-EVAS and specifically on our team in Pennsylvania for many years. So I would like to welcome her, and I'm going to let her drive the presentation here and turn it over as we look at some of this local assessment reporting.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was very kind of you. And hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be with you this afternoon. I am going to turn off my camera to conserve my country internet. So let me do that right now as we get started. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So I want to start with a PowerPoint. Kristen, can you guys see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Just to run through a few just reminders of things that are going on with reporting, and then near the end of this session and our time today, I will be going out to a demo site to show you the reporting that you'll be able to see with your local assessments. So let's get started with the PowerPoint. I am joined by John White and Jill Leandro from SAS EVAAS, so they may chime in as all good folks do whenever we need additional clarification. So let's get rolling. So this is the overview agenda of what I hope to cover today. So we want to do just a little bit of background information and overview of how this project came to be. I want to then move into talk about the assessment requirements, the modeling, and a little bit about the growth standard when you're looking at your local assessments. Then the bulk of the time that we have today will be going over a reporting demonstration to show you where you'll be able to find your local assessments within the PVAAS application. And then I have a few resources for you and wrapping up at the end with additional questions. So let's get that overview and the background. So everybody knows the year of 1920 will definitely go down in history books. A lot went on that year. It seemed like the world turned upside down all at once. We had some unfinished teaching and learning that year because all across the nation, our schools closed down in the March-April timeframe. Most states suspended their state assessments, as Pennsylvania did as well. However, in that year, up to a certain point, we did have local assessment data available from the beginning of year to the middle of year. And then, of course, in the spring, we didn't do roster verification or again, those end of year assessments because our children, our teachers were all sent home and to safety. So then in 2021, we're trying to get back to normal, but even in the 2021 school year with the Delta variant, we had lots of still tumultuous environments within schools because we had a lot of non-traditional school experiences. I know even here in North Carolina, we had some schools that were fully remote, some that were hybrid. Some kids came to school 2 days, but were at home another 2 days. It was just lots of variation in all of the schooling experiences. I think probably across our nation. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that as well. At that time, as Brian said, we wanted to make sure that we were able to provide some data for you guys because it's something to guess, but it's something to have data when you're backing decisions. So we provided an opportunity for voluntary local assessment data. All of the districts and schools across the districts across PA were able to submit their local assessment data. We're talking like MAP or STAR, iReady, those types of things. And then PDE actually submitted your CDTs, your classroom diagnostic tool assessment, on behalf of all of the districts in the state. So that was all sent to SAS. And then in the spring in Pennsylvania, you had a very wide testing window that started early and ended late, and so which is resulting in a late PVAAS reporting release. So that's up to where we are at this point. And so moving forward into 2022, your PVAAS reporting will be released in late winter. The local assessment reporting will also be available. And with luck on our side and people taking care and being safe, roster verification hopefully will resume and we'll be getting back on track with the end of year testing in 2022. And then moving forward, we're hoping for that return to annual assessments and reporting timeline will get back on track, and that local assessment analysis will continue. This wasn't, the intention was never for the local assessment data to just be a one and done. We're hoping to continue to provide that data and reporting for you to help with making informed decisions in schools and districts. So this whole project came about with the local assessment data reporting with the Pennsylvania Department of Education, the PVAAS statewide team, of course, Kristen and her team, and then in partnership with SAS. to give the LEAs that opportunity to submit to that local data, so that you could receive some reporting that's very similar to, if not identical to, the traditional PVAAS reports that you have for student growth. I want to be very, very clear here that these reports are for LEA and school use only to help with making decisions. They are not going to be used for accountability, nor will they be used for future Ready PA Index, nor ESSA report cards. It is just to help provide some data in the absence of the state testing and all of those things, to see if we can uncover and discover which of our children have been impacted more than others in this time of COVID. So the three types of reports that are being included in this local assessment data suite are the data summary reports, which I believe you have already received. I think you'd received those prior to our last session last week. And then last week on Tuesday, Dr. John White talked about the analysis on the unfinished teaching and learning. And so you'll be receiving those reports sometime either later this fall or early winter. And then today we're going to be talking about the PVAAS web reports. So this is our focus for today. Where are you going to be able to see your local assessments, and how do you read and interpret them, and those types of things? So we'll be going through all of that and showing you how to find that within the reporting later in this session. So the benefits of this reporting suite are pretty vast. It's going to help you with assessing the learning needs of students, students in different student groups overall, and help with the understanding of the impacts of COVID-19. So all of these reports together, the unfinished teaching and learning, the data summaries, and the reporting that you'll see within the PVAAS application, let's look and see what is the data telling us about the impacts of COVID. You'll be able to look at and evaluate different student experiences. Did the COVID-19 environment impact our students who were economically disadvantaged, or our students with IEPs, or a particular demographic? Who were our children who were most impacted by this experience? And then it will help you to analyze some recovery efforts and work to set goals in order to get students back on track as we move forward, coming out of the COVID environment that we've been in. So let's take a look a little bit about what data was coming in and what were the requirements of that data. So first of all, which years of data did you need to submit, or were you able to submit? So the PIMS student local assessment subtest template was what was used to submit the data to PIMS and to submit it to SAS. So in order to receive the unfinished teaching and learning reports that Dr. White talked about last Tuesday, districts had to submit all 4 of these years from 2017-18 all the way to 2021, so that we could be able to look at students' history in comparison to their COVID experiences in school. For the value added,
can I just clarify something real quick?
Yes, please do.
It's really just the kind of the final 3 years in your list that are needed for the unfinished teaching and learning reports. So that 18, 19, 19, 20, and 2021. So the 17, 18 wasn't actually required, in terms of the unfinished teaching and learning reports. So if you could have submitted those 3, you will get kind of full information. You may get some information if you only submitted 2 out of those 3 years, but that it really would be the full breadth of information if you could submit, if you submitted all of them.
Perfect. Thanks, John. Chime in at any time. I greatly appreciate that.
No problem.
For the value added reporting that we're going to look at today, you really only needed to submit 1 year of that data. And then the other thing that I want to mention is that the CDT measures were simply from the beginning of year to middle of year. So we were only looking at that time frame with regards to that particular assessment in Pennsylvania. So those were the years of data that could be submitted to be included in the reporting. So first and foremost, English language arts and math will be included in these assessments. And as of the webinar today, decisions are still up in the air a little bit as we are going through the data to determine whether or not Algebra 1 or biology would actually be able to be used in the analysis as well. John, do you have an update on that? Or are we still in the throes of determining if we will have algebra or biology?
Yeah, I think on the growth side, it's very likely that we'll have some of the kind of CDT Keystone-like assessments, but it hasn't been completely finalized at this point, but it certainly is something on the table, that's for sure. And then obviously with most of all the other local assessments, yes, they are kind of strictly math and ELA across the different grades, as well as with CDT. So that's where we're focusing for the most part.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure.
So let's talk a little bit about the assessment criteria, because you guys were able to submit a lot of various and different local assessment data. So in order for your assessments to be able to be included in value-added modeling, we have to have assessments that actually meet certain criteria. So the first one is sufficient stretch in the assessment so that we can actually look at both high and low achieving students there. They also have to have a predictive relationship between tests and different subjects, grade, and or time points. So for example, assessments must have a predictive relationship between the beginning of year and on how they perform at the end of the year for those local assessments. Correlations are actually used to describe that relationship and can be anywhere between a -1 and a 1. So the value of 0 indicates absolutely no relationship whatsoever in the scores on one test. And with the test scores, there's typically a positive relationship between two assessments, meaning pretty much that one can be used to make a prediction about the other one. So all teachers know and educators know that, let's just use reading as an example. If a student has difficulty with reading, that is definitely going to impact the way that they perform on all other assessments all the way around, whether it's math or history or whatever. So a value close to 1 indicates a really strong relationship between those two assessments. That 1 is very unlikely because that indicates a perfect relationship, and that's very unusual for that to happen. But it is possible to predict the performance on other tests by using these correlations. So the state assessments that would typically range from a 0.6 to a 0.8, which indicates a strong relationship. So we're able to use those in order to provide the reporting and those reporting on those assessments when they have those relationships. Test also must have some form of a numeric score. Most of the time we get assessment scores, you have a scale score, a raw score of some sort, but there are some assessments that actually just give you performance levels in terms of a score. And performance levels are those categories that indicate a student's performance relative to a grade level skill or concepts. So for example, your PSSA assessments have those performance levels, which include advanced, proficient, basic, and below basic. Behind those, however, are scores that we receive, not just those performance levels. So PVAAS analysis requires actual test scores, not those just performance levels, because we simply don't have sufficient data to distinguish between a score or another when we're talking about just a label of proficient. There's a wide range of scores there. So for this reason, the analysis cannot use assessments that only rely on the reports that give us performance levels with no actual scores, raw scores or scale scores behind them. The other thing that is required is being able to establish the expectation of growth. So most of the assessments that you would submit aside from your PVAAS reports and your CDTs are going to rely heavily on national norms. So for the reporting that we're providing for you right now, there's really no minimum number of LEAs or districts or schools that could submit that because we have the national norms for which we can do some comparison. assessments without national norms, we would have to have enough data across the state of Pennsylvania for LEAs and districts who administered that assessment so that we could actually create that within PA itself. So we would have to have enough schools administering a specific grade or subject or year for a particular assessment. And then the last thing that we would have to have in order to establish an expectation of growth is there must be enough time points in the assessment data to support measuring growth. So for example, we must have a beginning of year and an end of year for like the 2021 school year, or something from like the beginning of 18 to the end of 19, in order to be able to measure growth and to set that expectation of growth. Again, the CDT analysis, however, measures growth from beginning of year to middle of year for all years of the data. So just a few requirements. The national norms will be used for all of those assessments like MAP or STAR, iReady, those types of things, if they're able to be used in the analysis. And for the CDTs and your regular PVAAS, PSSA, and Keystones, they would use the data within the state itself. So I want to talk about the modeling that we will be using for Pennsylvania. The expectation of growth is actually derived from average growth across the state. And I've got a few examples here to talk about when we're talking about measuring that growth over time. The expectation is that wherever students begin the year, so for example, in this first graph over on the left, beginning of year, they're entering achievement. How did a group of students perform overall on average? And in the example here with this little purple dot, this is an example of a group of students who entered the year at maybe the 50th NCE or normal curve equivalent. And then when we go and travel through time, a lot of instruction takes place in all of those times, and we get to the end of the year and we measure growth again. If students maintain their relative position in the state distribution, then we would say that they have met the growth standard. They did exactly what we would have expected them to do because they stayed and maintained their position. However, teachers do a lot to provide resources, to provide instruction, differentiation for students, and they tailor instruction to each individual student. And if they students experience a greater than average experience with growth, they might score not at the 50th, but score above it or below it. So if they score below, that 50th, we would say NCE compared to the beginning of year, we would say that those students have lost ground. And then if the students actually performed above the 50th NCE, we would say that they gain ground over that period of time. The model that's used in Pennsylvania for measuring growth in grades 4 to 8 in PVAAS, we use the PSSA scale scores and convert them to NCEs, and so that we can have them on a common scale, which is the scale we're talking about here. That growth standard methodology measures growth in terms of normal curve equivalent. And when I talk with folks, even just as recent as last week, when we're talking about normal curve equivalent, I like to tell folks it's just another measuring unit because it seems very foreign to folks who are outside of the statistical world. But if I bring it back to the classroom, to a teacher, I can tell them it's just another measuring unit. You very much understand what a letter grade of a B is. You understand what an 85% on a grade or a score is, and you understand that a 17 out of 20 is also somewhere equivalent to that letter grade of a B or that 85%. Each one of those that I just listed is a different measuring unit. We had a fraction, a percentage, and a letter grade. None of those are scary to educators at all whatsoever because they each are different measuring units, but we know what they mean. Normal curve equivalents are very similar to percentiles. Those scores fall somewhere along this distribution, and they have equal intervals across this distribution so that we can measure growth equitably. So just know that the local assessments that you're going to be seeing will be using normal curve equivalents. It's based on relative growth. We're going to talk about this a whole lot. So it's relative to either the average experience in Pennsylvania, or it's relative to those national norms. We'll talk a bit more about that in just a bit. So let's look at the normal distribution of achievement, what this actually looks like when students take an assessment. Having been a teacher in classrooms, I know that some of my students actually struggled a little bit in my classroom, and they were on the lower end of achievement than some of the students that I worked with actually were on that higher end of the performance. But overall, you have students who perform in that average range. And when you're talking about a statewide assessment like CDTs or one of the local assessments that are administered nationally, there are a lot of scores that form this bell-shaped curve. But I want to talk about now the average achievement for groups of students. And this will become a little bit clearer as we go through the presentation a bit more. Some of the districts in Pennsylvania administered MAP, others administered STAR. There's a huge long list of assessments that could have been administered in the state. It's important to know that those students are being compared to the national norm. So it's all of the students in Pennsylvania who took the MAP assessment for math or the MAP assessment for reading or STAR. Those students are pulled out and compared to the national norm. Not all of the students in Pennsylvania, but those who took the MAP assessment. So that distribution of achievement, again, those students who took that MAP assessment who were part of that Pennsylvania group, maybe they scored at the 48th NCE on that normal curve equivalent scale. Just a little bit below maybe the national average. But again, the normal curve equivalent is just another measuring unit. It's very similar to the percentile scale. They match up at the 1st and the 50th and the 99th. The only difference here is that you notice that percentile scale bunches up a bit in the middle, which forms that central curve at the top, but the normal curve equivalents are equally distributed across the bottom. And you can think of them very similarly, but just know that the normal curve equivalent scale, we can do some mathematical functions with, like averaging and so forth, whereas you can't do that with percentiles. So let's look at some examples of how growth is measured using that growth standard methodology. Let's say on your CDTs, for example, the average entering achievement for a group of students at the beginning of the year could have been at the 48th NCE. And then when they took that assessment again at the end of the year, or their exiting achievement, what was that change over time from the beginning of the year to the end of the year? Well, this change happens to be 0, so their growth measure would be 0. This is not always going to be an exact subtraction like this one is due to rounding and other things, but just know that these students, based on the description of that bell curve, they were at the 48th NCE and they maintained at that 48th NCE. So they actually moved that growth standard. Another example is, again, students entering at the 48th NCE, but at the end of the year or their exiting achievement is at 51.5 NCE. Their change over time was 3.6 NCEs. In this case, students didn't maintain their place in the state distribution. They actually moved a bit to the right. They gained a little bit of ground. Another person that I've worked in the past says, did they keep their place in line? And in this particular case, they did not. They actually moved up a few places in line at 3.6. Let's look at another example of averaging NCE at the beginning of the year might be at 38 NCE. These students are well below the state average, and at the end of the year or their exiting achievement might be at 35.5. And when you look at that, these lower achieving students actually lost ground when you're looking at the information or the data. They actually lost 2.4 NCEs. So these are low achieving students who lost in this particular growth standard methodology. When you're looking at it, they lost their place in line. They went back a few spaces. And then I provided one more because the only difference here is average NCE at the beginning of the year is 38, but then average NCE at middle of the year is 40.5. This would be like for your CDTs, where students actually gained a little bit of ground, 2.4 NCEs, but the point in time that we were talking about earlier with measuring from beginning of year to middle of year is a different point in time. Instead of beginning of year to end of year. This is beginning to middle of year. So let's talk a little bit more about that expectation of growth and what you're going to see in the reporting. So first, for the classroom diagnostic test and your PSSAs and your Keystone exams, the expectation of growth is calculated at the state level and is determined by the state average for each subject and grade or course. So basically, how are students in Pennsylvania doing relative to other students in Pennsylvania? When you're looking at other assessments, again, like MAP or STAR, iReady, Acadience, the expectation of growth for these is established through national norms based on a particular norming year. I think the last national norm, if I'm not mistaken, for MAP was like during 2020 or 2019, somewhere along there. So how are your students doing as compared to the students in that national norming sample in that particular year? And I'm sure all of the assessments that I've listed before, MAP, STAR, iReady, Acadience, all have a very specific norming year that students would be compared against. Nevertheless, when you're looking at the expectation of growth, whether it is the national norm or the within Pennsylvania expectation of growth, 0 is always going to be that expectation of growth where students met the growth standard. You notice when you're moving over to the left on this scale, you're moving to that red area where students did not meet the growth standard. With a crescent, that means that the growth index extends past that particular point on the bar. And then as you're moving to the right, students exceeded the growth standard or made more growth than expected, with the growth index being here. We're going to look at this a lot more, but I just wanted to point out that this black dotted line here is either going to represent the average experience in the state, depending on the assessment, or the average growth of on the national norming, on the national norm test. So I wanted to also bring into play the index scale. What you saw here with these reds and greens and yellows and blues is the index scale. Any value that falls between the -1 and 1 is going to have met the growth standard. A value between 1 and up to 2 is going to have exceeded the growth standard with moderate evidence. And then anything 2 or above has exceeded the growth standard. The same thing is kind of similar on the bottom. Again, anything in that yellow range between -1 and -2 is where you there's moderate evidence that you fell short of the growth standard. And then when you move into the red of -2 to -3, you have there's more evidence or significant evidence that the students did not meet the growth standard. So this will be very clear when we look at the value added report, but I just wanted to explain how we arrive at the growth index. Each time you look at that beginning of the year to the end of the year and you come up with that difference, whatever that is the growth measure itself. And every measure has some level of standard error, some level of certainty around that measure. And when you take the growth measure and the standard error and you divide the standard error into the growth measure, you arrive at the index. So in this particular example over on the right, you have a growth measure of 3 with a standard error of 1.3. That would give you a growth index of 2.23, which you see here on this bar graph represented by the white dot. The growth index is 2.23. Again, we'll look at more of these when we look at the value added report. So I wanted to be sure, as we're talking about all of these different assessments, that you understand what's happening. So if your district or school gave MAP and iReady or the RenStar assessment or AIMSweb or Acadience or whatever else, those students are going to be pulled together in Pennsylvania as the students who took the MAP assessment for math, for example. All of these assessments will not be combined for a statewide look at growth. It's how did we do in MAP compared to the national norm for MAP? How did our Pennsylvania students do in RenStar as compared to the national norm for RenStar? So each of these will be their own type of little I don't know, I don't want to call them a cohort because they're not a cohort, a group. They're their own type of group, the students in Pennsylvania who took MAP, or the students in Pennsylvania who took Ames Web. Then there's also a larger group of students in Pennsylvania who took your classroom diagnostic tool, those assessments. And again, that is based on the state average. How did our students in Pennsylvania on average do on this test for this particular grade and subject or course? So we're talking about different groups of students being compared to different things, and that those things being the national norm for each assessment or the state average for the CDT. So let me take a moment to navigate over to the PVAAS reporting. I'm going to run you through all of the different places that you'll be able to see the local assessment reporting. So give me one moment to get out of the PowerPoint, and I will go over here, first of all, to the value added report. Kristen, I want to make sure that you guys can still see my screen.
Yeah, Deneen, hi Deneen, this is Kristen. It may be good to just, some of your audio has been a little choppy at times and a little chipmunky at times, as you know what I mean by that. So I just might want to check periodically. You might want to check to make sure your audio is in sync with your visual in terms of,
Okay.
you know what I mean?
Yes, thank you for that. Please
Sure.
tell me that anytime. Tell me to slow down. It doesn't bother me at all. So let me get logged in again. 1 second. And if there are questions that we want to address right now while I'm getting logged back in, because I've timed out, Kristen, might be a good time to do that as well.
While you're logging in there, Deneen, I'll just, knowing that we might have some different people in this one that were in the one last week. So timing of things, we're hopeful here in the next few weeks that we'll be getting the unfinished teaching and learning reporting out to the superintendents and CEOs who will be receiving that reporting, meaning those LEAs that had enough historical data to give that reporting. And then, John, I know you are all working very hard with each specific assessment, which they're taking great care, in yielding this reporting back to LEAs that did submit data that could be used for this purpose. You're looking winterish is what I'm going to put out there. Is that fair to say? I'll let you commit or not commit.
Yeah, that's right for the value added reporting that would be going into the PVAAS site. And then, with the unfinished teaching and learning reports, those should be, we're hoping to go out, go over to your team fairly soon. So we're trying to wrap up all of those. And then, yes, the PVAAS web reporting with the local assessments would be going out a little bit later than that.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right, Deneen, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. So sorry for the timeout. So guys, we're looking at some demonstration data here for all-star school districts. So I want you to feel very comfortable that we're not showing anybody's data particularly. This is just demonstration data. And this is the value added report. You get to the value added report after logging into PVAAS by going to the reports tab, and you can find the value added report for a school or a value added report for a district. If you have access to district level data, that will be there. So I am logged in as a district administrator for All-Star School District, and I'm really interested in looking at some data for one of our elementary schools. Particularly, you can select the drop-down menu for districts and schools in the filter panel. You'll notice that you've got a district tab here and a school tab here. When you select school, you can go down and select one of the schools within the district. I'm going to select Baseball Elementary School. So let me acclimate you to this page. The filter panel over on the left-hand side gives you the options for what it is that you're wanting to see. We'll go through each of those in just a moment. And then over on the right-hand side, you've got all of the data for a particular school or district, depending on what you're looking on for the most recent year. And in this demo site, we're looking at data for 2021. So if you notice in the filter panel, you can change the district or subject. We'll come back to add a comparison in just a bit. The growth color indicator is displayed, which is this bar over here. You also have the option of turning on some growth data or achievement data. And then down in the test or subjects area, you have PSSA, Keystone, and then local assessments or local. Since we're talking about the local assessment data today, I'm going to turn off the PSSA and the Keystone data and just look at the local data. Below that on in the filter panel, you can turn on additional years of data. And then you can also look at information based on the growth color indicators. So while this demo site says local assessments, when your reporting comes out later on in the winter, you're going to see the actual name of the assessment, whether it was the classroom diagnostic tool or MAP or STAR and so on. So the actual name of the assessment will be here.
Janine, can I ask a question? Some LEAs submitted more than one assessment, for example, Acadians and CDTs. Will they see both of those and they will pick which one they'd like to take a look at?
That's right, Kristen, exactly right. If you submit one and each one met the criteria that we talked about before, they will see those listed here sequentially, whether they were CDTs and Acadians, for example, like Kristen said, you'll be able to see both by name.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So as I said, the most recent year will display by default. I am a huge advocate of looking at data over time to see if I can find trends in the data over time. So I'm actually going to go and turn on some additional years of data by selecting them here in the years panel. And now each of those years are listed: 2018, 2019, 2020, and so on. Scrolling up and down again for me is not something that I would want to do. So I want to reorganize the data so that I can see it in a way that suits my needs. So you can actually move the columns at the top, grade or year, to the left or to the right, depending on the needs that you have. So if I click grade, I can move it to the right. And now I can look at my kindergarten, first and second grade, and so on students across time. And I can see their experience in 2018, 19, 20, and 21. So let's say, as an example, this is our CDT, our classroom diagnostic tool for kindergarten. And I can see in 18 and 19 that they were in this red, well below. They weren't meeting the growth standard. They were well below the growth standard. And then by the time they took that middle of year assessment in 2020, we had them on the move. But then when we're coming back to 2021, again, maybe our kindergartners were on a blended model or something, and they've lost a bit of ground. So just looking at all of the information across time is quite helpful. If I move the grade over once more, it gives me a chance to look at our local math in combination with math and ELA for the same grade. So I can look at my kindergartners, my first graders, and so forth, and look at how they've done across time. So it's wonderful to look at something like second grade math, where you see this very positive trend moving over to the right, or some consistency that you see here at third grade math, where they were doing really well. And we were asking questions, which of our students experienced something different during COVID? Maybe these students actually did experience something different during COVID, and that's why we're seeing this results. The data that you're seeing here simply can tell you what happened according to the local assessment data. You have to bring your local knowledge and expertise and potentially even additional data to the table to uncover why things happened. So in addition to looking at the graph and the colors, you can also turn on some additional data. So let's go back and familiarize ourselves with those values we were talking about before. So let's turn on some growth data. So the columns that appear over on the right, we have the growth index, the growth measure, and the standard error. And from the slide that we talked about a few moments ago, we know that you arrive at the growth index by taking the growth measure and dividing by the standard error to arrive at the growth index. And the growth index that appears in this first column is also what is represented over here by this white dot. So this 2.23 growth index is what you see here with this white dot. You also have an additional column that tells you the student count, how many students were used in the analysis for this particular assessment. So let's go back again and turn off the growth data and then turn on some achievement data. Again, back to those slides where we were talking about those boxes of entering achievement and exiting achievement. That is the information that you can also see on the value-added report. These 124 students entered kindergarten at the beginning of the year at 64.9 NCE. And then when they exited kindergarten, they were at the 55.7 NCE, 55.7 NCE. So they lost a bit of ground, which is why you see this growth index over here. And if you turn on both the growth and the achievement, you can see all of that information together. So the difference between entering and exiting would arrive closely to that growth, the growth measure. And then the growth measure divided by the standard error gives you that growth index. So a lot of information here about your local assessment data, which is a little bit different than what you're going to see. I am not a pro at MAP or all of these others, but I know that those particular assessments give you some information about the growth from one administration to the next. These local assessment pieces are going to give you information from within the year. I saw John turn his camera on. What you got to say, John?
Thanks, Deneen. Yeah, I thought I would speak to some of what Jen Ross was asking in the chat and what you were just mentioning with all of this information on the board. I feel like it's helpful. You know, with many of these kind of interim benchmark assessments, if you will, or these local assessments, such as, well, there's many of them that we're going to be looking at here. You know, when we have a national norm, as Deneen has said, the NCEs will be relative to that national norm. And so you can see in that achievement column, the entering and exiting. So in many cases for at least 2019 and 2021, that would be your beginning of year group and your end of year group. And so that is going to look at your group level achievement for those students in a particular grade and year. Of course, I think we mentioned earlier, the 2020 school year is going to be the beginning of the year to the middle of the year, since there is no end of year assessments for the overwhelming majority of all local assessments, given the school closures due to COVID. So it's a little bit of a nuanced difference, but in general, those achievement measures, again, will be relative to that national norm. And so if you're using an assessment that kind of makes available either the national percentiles or national NCEs relative to those norms, and that information should be somewhat similar. It's just that this is specifically for the group level. Now, in general, when you're thinking about the growth data, so we are, again, measuring growth relative to that national norm expectation in most cases. That means it will line up to some of the growth data that you may receive from your local assessment vendor if the growth is measured relative to that national norm. Most of the larger vendors, you know, like your Renaissance Learnings, NWEAs, potentially like iReady, iStation, folks like that do measure growth and provide some measure relative to that national norm. But again, in PVAAS, it's all about looking at that group as a whole. You will be able to see individual student level information, but these measures in terms of these value-added measures or growth measures are all about the group as a whole, and then whether or not we're seeing statistical evidence that they are making more growth than what we're expecting. And I'll just answer a question from Sarah really quick since I'm speaking. You know, right now, if you log on the reporting, you're going to see 2017, 2018, and 2019 data on your PVAAS report site. We don't have 2020 state assessment information. As you know, the 2021 state assessment data was received or was administered kind of over a much larger period of time. So that will be coming out a little bit later, you know, probably in the coming year once all of that data comes in and we start to look at that. So totally fine that you're only seeing 2017, 18, and 19 right this moment on your reporting. But there will be more information coming with these local assessments, as Kristen and I were talking about earlier in the winter.
Thanks, John.
Sure.
Just keep turning on your camera when you want to say something. That's great. So some additional features in the filter panel that I wanted to point out are that you can actually filter also by the growth color indicators. And I think this is going to be a really good opportunity to find those places that are going to need your attention moving forward. So I'm going to turn off all of these except for the below and well below. So I'm going to turn off meets, I'm going to turn off above, and I'm going to turn off well above. This gives you a chance to look at those grades and subjects who performed below or well below. I'm also going to turn off 18 just because I want to look at like the last 3 years of our local assessments. And this could be that call to action that you're looking for. Where are we experiencing the greatest amount of growth, but also where are we losing ground the most?
They sent the data because then they corrected them.
So for example, in local English language arts for 5th grade, this would be a call to action for me if I were a school administrator or somebody working in curriculum. What's happening with our local assessments that our students are not performing as well as others? So again, you can use these filters to find where you're seeing best practices by leaving on the well above and above in the meets, or you can just turn on those filters to pinpoint where are those calls to action. So there's so much more to explore on the value added report with comparisons and cohort views, but for the sake of time, I want to move ahead again to another report that you might not be quite as familiar with. And that particular report is the growth of student groups. I can't remember, Kristen, how long PA has had the growth of student groups. I think it's relatively new.
We got it the year before the Future Ready PA Index started. So I'm sorry a school year's not coming to mind, but I'm sure
that's okay.
Jen Ross will remember and put in the chat box.
That is okay. I'm very happy about having this report. I've been to many trainings before, and I've had like directors of special education or other folks who have been there who've said, but what's in this reporting for me? And I would always encourage folks at the district office level who are working with particular student groups to take advantage of the growth of student groups report. So let me start really quickly with an overview of this report and the navigation features. Of course, each report has the title of growth of student groups in the district and the school. There's a year selection drop down, and as time passes, you'll be able to view this report across multiple years. Then the data in the report can be viewed in 2 ways. On the first tab, you can view the growth by subject area, the math, ELA, and science, or you can view the growth by a particular student group. So for this school, the student groups, if I click here for this school, Baseball Elementary, you can see the student groups that are actually going to be visible in the reports below. In this case, they have the all students, Black, economically disadvantaged, lowest performing 33rd% of the students, students with IEPs, and white students. So you might be going, well, where are all the other groups? In order for a group to be listed here, we have to have enough sufficient testing history for students and at least 11 students to have a specific group. So for example, notice that this school doesn't have a group for Hispanic students. So that means that this school doesn't have enough Hispanic students, at least 11 individuals, with enough testing history for us to give you information here. It's also important to notice that students can appear in multiples of these groups. For example, if Deneen is at your school, I might be in all students, I might be economic advantage, I might also have an IEP, and I might be white. So I could be in 4 out of these 6 groups. So a student can appear more than once. The final note that I want to show you before we dig into finding some information in this report is that the values are not clickable. So you're not going to be able to drill to the individual student names. So let's see what we can learn about our local data from this report. So if you notice, first of all, everything is expanded when you first come here. So I'm actually going to collapse the PSSA, and I'm going to collapse the Keystone so that it's just a little less noise on the screen. And I can look at our local assessment for all students by grade level. I think this is absolutely marvelous because it can give you a chance to look again. You have your growth measure, your standard error, your growth index, and then the growth color indicators associated with that index. This gives you a really quick glance and look for math, because we're in the subject of math for the local assessments. I can very quickly see, based on the color scheme, that our kindergartners are meeting the growth standard. We've got evidence that our first graders are above the growth standard. And they've got a couple of areas here with the reds and the yellows that might be our call to action in math. And then our 6, 7, and 8 are in those blues above or well above the growth standard. And this is all students. But then you can also compare that information based on specific subgroups. So let's go down and see how our Black students are performing. Again, I'm going to collapse the PSSA and the Keystone and just look at the local assessments. So let's just take kindergarten as an example. So our all students for kindergarten for our local assessments are meeting expected growth. When we go down and look at our Black students for kindergarten, we are below because we're between that -1 and -2 at that -1.37. So we have moderate evidence that our Black students in kindergarten are losing ground in math. And then if we go down and look at another, we've got economically disadvantaged. I'm going to collapse again here. And our kindergartners here, we're on that negative side of 0 with -0.75, but that's still between that -1 and 1. We're meeting expected growth with we're meeting the growth standard with our economically disadvantaged students. And then our lowest performing 33% of students in kindergarten, we're meeting with them as well. So you can see you can compare group to group to group. I also like to look at this report by looking at it by subject area. So when you go back and you look at science, for example, you can look at it all students, our Black students, economically disadvantaged, and so forth. Or if you're looking at it for your local assessments for ELA, you can look at that again based on each of those subgroups or student groups. So this gives you a chance to take a look at, if I were that director who was looking for my students who have an IEP, I could go and look at my students with an IEP and look at the local assessments. How are our students with IEPs doing in kindergarten through 8th grade? And if I look here, I can see, for example, my 2nd and 3rd grade are not doing as well as the other grades. So what does that mean for me? What is my call to action as the director? What do I want to find out? What questions do I have for this school about the services for students in 2nd and 3rd grade to help me to uncover why these students might not have experienced as much growth as I would have hoped in comparison to the other grades for that particular group of students with IEPs. So this is one of my new favorite reports because it gives you a to look at particular groups of students to see what is, where are those areas that you can impact students' lives in ways that would help them and to help tailor instruction for different student groups. So you'll be able to see your local assessment data in the value added report and the growth of student groups. There are two other places that you'll be able to see them in the reporting. So let me get out of this report. I have these saved as in the PowerPoint because they were a little easier to share. So let me go back and share that once more. Just 1 second. You'll be able to see your here we go. There we go. We've looked at the value added report. We've looked at the growth of student groups. You'll also be able to see your local assessments and the student testing history. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. So here's a sample for student 1. This is PSSA math. Please note that these colors are not representative of your value added colors. The red is simply the student trend. The green diamond represents the school where this student took the assessment, and then the blue represents the district. So if I'm looking at in terms of state percentiles and years and grades or subjects where they tested, I can see how this student has performed over time in the student testing history report. If you take a look at the legend across the x-axis, you'll notice that this is representative of the PSSA performance in 3rd grade in 2018. But you'll now notice that we've got local assessment data in here. We've got beginning of year at 3rd grade and end of year at 3rd grade. We've got the 4th grade PSSA and then local assessments again, all across here from 18 to 20. And then we've got the 2021 PSA score. So you'll be able to see students' performance across time, including the local assessments now on their student testing history. That same information that you see here in the graph is also available in table form so that you can see the exact NCE for each of these assessments and this percentile. And then if a performance level is associated with that assessment, such as your PSSAs, in this particular case, the student was advanced and advanced again in 4th grade and then proficient in 6th grade, you'll be able to see those performance levels as well. Let's take a look at another example. This student is not quite as high performing as our first sample. This student is largely performing below the 50th state percentile. And if you were looking for that call to action, this would be one of my students that I would want to pay attention to, because in the most recent year, that PSSA 2021, they lost a lot of ground in comparison to their history. So this student didn't fare as well in COVID as we would have hoped. There may be many reasons for that, but you can see that they were doing pretty well with PSSA and local, got even better. And then what happened during COVID? Why weren't we able to reach the student? And then again, that data is found here in the table below. For the PSSA English Language Arts assessment in 3rd grade, they were basic, then came up to proficiency and back down to basic in 6th grade. So this would again be one of those calls to action. What can we do to help in planning for this student moving forward? So you'll be able to see those local assessments again in the value added, the growth of student groups, and the student testing history. And then this is just a sneak peek ahead, everybody, because you're used to seeing diagnostic reports with blue and gold bars going up and down. This is a sneak peek of our new diagnostic report that you'll be able to see as well for your assessments, your local assessments. So let's take a look at that. So the colors have now changed. So let's take a look at this 2021 local math 6th grade. And we're looking at this report based on growth by state achievement groups. So students here in the lowest all the way up to the highest, we have different results as compared to the growth standard. Our mid-high and our highest students in 6th grade were exceeding the growth standard here. Here we were meeting the growth standard, falling behind, and then meeting. I love how Kristen and her team says 1s and 2s must be blue. That means that they must be making more growth than the growth standard in order to help those students to catch up. So there would be something here, again, that call to action that says at this school in 6th grade, our teachers need potentially some support in helping students to recover based on the data that we're seeing here with our lowest students up to our average students losing that bit of ground, and then our highest students actually achieving ground. And this might be a pattern that you would expect to see coming out of COVID, depending on what happened in your community or in your schools. Let's take a look at another one. This is still comparing growth by state achievement group, but the new diagnostic report allows you to compare year to year. It used to be that the blue bar represented the most recent year, and the gold bar would represent up to 3 prior years. Now you actually get to take the years and stack them up however you'd like to compare year against year. So here we're looking at, again, the purple bar represents math for 6th grade on our local assessments. And then we're comparing it to 2019 for 6th grade as well. So you can compare side by side 1 year to the next, what happened between 2019 and 2021. You also have an opportunity in the filter panel on the new diagnostic report to group and regroup students based on different factors. And in this particular example, we have growth values by race. So how did our students that we had in our school for 8th grade language arts, how did they grow? Their growth measures here by race. And did we lose ground with specific student groups as compared to others? And what do we need to do coming year to turn that around? So this is a different way of looking at your growth data by race. And the final example that I have here is you also have the opportunity to look at entering achievement. And this is an example of entering achievement by gender. And again, we're looking at a comparison because we added, this is 2021 local English language arts. So whatever local assessment we're talking about is this purple, this light purple or lavender bar. And then the 2021 local assessment for the same grade in 2021. And they're entering achievement. So how did our females enter as compared to our males? So just lots of different ways that you're going to be able to look and dissect your data in the new diagnostic reports, which will be coming out again later in the late winter or early spring. So all of these reports that we were just looking at give you a chance to look and discover lots of different things. So you can use the value added, the student history report, the growth of student groups, and the new diagnostic reports to answer some questions like these. So did we see a decline in growth during the pandemic in some grades and subjects or courses? We did see an example of that in the reports that we looked at. And if yes, what were the factors that contributed to that decline? What happened? I think it was a 5th grade group that we looked at that were constantly in the red year after year. And so what are the reasons for that? What do we need to do there? You can also look at a question that would, are there various student groups growing similarly over time based on local assessments? Where do we have those consistent patterns in our local assessments? How are our students growing? What do we need for a particular student, like our student 1 and 2, when we were looking at their student testing history? What types of trends do we see over time? And then across subjects. So we can look at a student's testing history in math. We could also look at it in reading and in science. What do those reports tell us when we look at them together? And then when you are looking at your diagnostic reports for the same subject and across grades, are there consistent patterns of growth for different achievement groups? And again, you have the opportunity to group them in various and different ways, depending on your questions and your preferences when you're looking at them. So your local assessments being added to the PVAAS application, I think is of great benefit to Pennsylvania to help you look at where do we need to make adjustments? Where do we need to continue growing strong in order to help our students as we're coming out of the COVID learning experience? So Pennsylvania has these new diagnostics reports that are coming soon for both local assessments and the annual PVAAS reporting. All of those different measurement options that we were talking about are listed here. You have growth as a measuring option, exiting and entering achievement, the percentage of students meeting or exceeding a predicted score, the percentage of students who are reading at proficient and then at advanced. Then you also have a number of grouping options and different ways that you can look at students. I won't read all of these to you, but this is a huge list in different ways that you'll be able to group the students and answer questions that you may have about how students did with experiencing education during COVID. So finally, we've got a few resources that you'll be able to access. We do have a local assessment FAQ that will answer lots of questions based on the data summary reports that you got on the unfinished teaching and learning, and questions about the value-added reporting that you'll see within the PVAAS application. There's also some information in the PIMS manual and calendar webpage to help you understand what data needed to be submitted or can be submitted to continue receiving local assessment reporting. And then, of course, I hit very high levels and tried to stay quite high in the conversation. But if you want more details about the statistical modeling and business modeling of PVAAS analysis, there's definitely a paper or a report there that can help you with that. And then I can't speak highly enough of your PVAAS statewide team. Kristen and her team offer a tremendous amount of support to Pennsylvania educators. And in fact, they have 1-hour data consultations that can be customized for your district and or school team. So Kristen or Jen, would you like to talk about these and what folks need to do if they wanted to reach out to you guys?
Sure, happy to do that. So thank you very much, Deneen and John, for today. If, once this reporting is released, just like once the unfinished teaching and learning reporting is released, if you'd like to connect with a member of our team, just pop an email to the email on the screen, pdepbass@iu13.org. We have a nice online scheduling tool that we use, so you can find a date and time that works at your convenience for that. I think it is fair to say for all of us, clearly, what we've been experiencing together over the past, 20 months, however many months it is, has been new for everyone. But this is also some new, types of information that we're introducing this year, and so if there are questions that come up in those one-on-one forums, we're not going to just attempt to answer a question. We'll go back to John and Deneen and their team just to make sure we're giving a really clear, concise answer back to you, as LEAs and schools, about the use of this information. But I think, it does create an opportunity to start to put several pieces of information together to tell the story of what's happening, or at least from the information we have versus not having any. From the information we have, what can we take away and learn from our work over the past 20 months and moving forward, as we're working with students. So, please don't hesitate to reach out. There'll be additional information that SAS is putting in the online help system, and things like that. And we have an FAQ document that'll, accompany the release of the reporting that will go out as well in that communication to the superintendent and CEO. But actually, now that I'm thinking about it, this particular reporting, since we're just going to be notifying LEAs about the availability of this on the PVAAS website, we will communicate this out to likely district and school admin account holders, so that you will know that this information is available and has been released on the PVAAS website in the winterish time, right, John? Winterish time. So
Yeah,
that's all from our Jen Ross. Anything to add at your end that I didn't think about?
No, I think that pretty much summed it up pretty well, Kristen. That sounds good.
John or Deneen, anything else from your end there before Brian Campbell wraps things up?
No, I mean, we're excited about this project getting kicked off in Pennsylvania. We're pretty excited to get a lot of this information out there. So looking forward to talking with more people about it for sure.
Absolutely. I think this is something, Kristen, that folks have been asking for a long time. And I'm really glad we had the opportunity to work on this project with PA, because I think this is something that educators will really appreciate having at their disposal.
All right, well, thank you, Brian Campbell. Turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And truly, thank you, John, Kristen, Deneen, everyone, team. Just really well done, very informative. And I agree, this is really good stuff. These reports are great. Information I think folks have wanted for a long time, and have more really on usable data than we've had in a long time as we kind of tackle some of these questions about things like so I appreciate everyone joining us today. Again, as Chris said, there's the opportunity to engage 13 technical support. There are some office hours, additional webinars from check out that website and plug in for both the December SAS Institute and the Data Summit occurs in spring in I think March this year, March, April. Lots of information and additional training and more information available there as well. And remember, we are going to continue service or this program in the coming year. Reporting on your local assessment data, and that's for both folks that already submitted more data and continue your kind of longitudinal study there, or folks that weren't able to submit last spring, due to some of the time constraints and some of the things that were going on logistically around. You will have the opportunity to submit for the first time as well. If you'd like to do that coming up, that window opens, I think, late June. So lots of great work to continue around this project. I want to thank everyone that's in today. I know time is a precious commodity, especially around this time of year, and with a lot of competing interests. So I appreciate your dedication, your interest in this project, and truly to all our school leaders out there and folks that took the time out of their day. Just know it's appreciated. We appreciate everything you do, in challenging times and in any other time. So thank you for all you do for the kids and education in the Commonwealth. And we will be back in and check the website and some of those other channels for more information on the local assessment project. Thanks, everyone.